You noticed. It wasn't a coincidence, it wasn't carelessness, it wasn't distraction, it was calculation, it was programmed silence, it was rehearsed distance, and the moment you realized, something inside you broke. It didn't break into tiny pieces. It shattered like the ground cracking beneath your feet. You tried to hide it, you tried to pretend it didn't hurt. You tried to smile at other people, as if the wound wasn't wide open, but the blood was flowing inside, and every second burned more. You knew. You always knew when someone was present, and you always sensed when someone was absent, not just in body, but in spirit, in intent, in the cold choice to not see you, not hear you, not feel you. He avoided you, not because he was busy, not because he forgot, but because he decided. And that decision was a blade, and you felt the blade slowly entering where no one can see, entering where only you can feel, entering the place you tried so many times to protect. The pain wasn't his absence. The pain was the fact that he chose absence. You felt rejection turning into weight, and the weight turning into silence, and the silence morphing into an emptiness that no one could fill. The emptiness didn't scream. It whispered. It whispered when you woke up. It whispered when you tried to focus on other things. It whispered when you closed your eyes at night. You realized it wasn't the first time. They had left you before. They had avoided you before. They had chosen to distance themselves from you before. But this time, it felt crueler. It felt more intentional. It felt like an invisible punishment. And you didn't know what you had done. Or maybe you did. Maybe you revisited every detail, every word, every gesture, trying to find a reason, trying to find a flaw, trying to find a justification. But you didn't find one. And that was even worse, because when there's no reason, you realize that the wound isn't about what you did. It's about who you are. And that thought becomes poison, a slow poison, a poison that starts in your chest, seeps through your bones, reaches your fingertips, a poison you try to hide with smiles. But it explodes in silence when no one's watching. He avoided you, but your reaction changed everything. And this is where you realize the point you never wanted to see. You didn't break like before. You didn't chase after him like before. You didn't beg like before. You stood your ground, standing tall, bleeding but standing tall, with a crushed heart but standing tall, with teary eyes but standing tall. And that reaction was unexpected, even for you, even for him. Because when someone avoids you, they expect you to panic. They expect you to humiliate yourself. They expect you to lose control. But you realized the opposite was happening. The pain made you stronger. The absence woke you up. The silence taught you to speak to yourself. You realized that you didn't need to be seen to exist. You realized that you didn't need to be chosen to be enough. You realized that his pain wasn't your measure. You realized that his distance didn't erase your presence. And that realization was an earthquake. It was an internal revolution. It was a scream that only you heard, but it echoed in every cell of your being. Have you been through this? Share your thoughts in the comments. He avoided you on purpose, but your reaction dismantled his logic. Because your strength didn't come from the love you received. It came from the love you didn't receive, from the love that was lacking. From the love you had to generate yourself in the dark. You realized that rejection wasn't a sentence. It was fuel. You realized that silence wasn't a prison, it was space. You realized that absence wasn't a punishment, it was an opportunity. And in that moment, you saw yourself differently. You realized that you weren't the same person who fell so many times. You realized that something had changed. And what changed wasn't the other person, it was you. The reaction changed everything. Because it showed that pain no longer had the power to erase you. It showed that absence no longer had the strength to break you. It showed that rejection no longer had the authority to define you. You realized. And when you realized, pain lost some of its control. It still hurt, it still throbbed, it still burned. But it no longer dragged you down into the same old hole. This time you stood your ground, even shaky, even uncertain, even scared. You stood your ground, and that changed everything. If this touched you, comment. I needed to hear this. You realized it wasn't about him, it never was. It was about you, about how you reacted, about how you saw yourself, about how you allowed yourself to bleed or allowed yourself to bloom. He avoided you, but you didn't lose yourself. And when you don't lose yourself, the whole world loses the power to control you. And now, when you look back, you realize that pain didn't destroy you. You realize that absence didn't kill you. You realized that rejection didn't define you. You realized that your reaction changed everything. And if it changed everything before, it can change again. It can change now. It can change moving forward. Comment with a heart if you're on this journey together. You realized there was still something unresolved. It doesn't matter how much you say you've moved on. It doesn't matter how much you say you've healed. Deep down, there's a scar that still pulses. A wound that never completely closed. You feel it. You feel it when you hear a silence that shouldn't be there. You feel it when someone changes their tone without explanation. You feel it when someone avoids eye contact and pretends it's nothing. You perceive everything. And perceiving sometimes is a curse. He deliberately avoided you. And this echoed in repetitions. Echoes of old rejections. Echoes of doors that closed in your face. Echoes of conversations interrupted midway. Echoes of broken promises without warning. Each echo pulls you back. Back to the moment when you asked yourself, why me? Back to the moment when you believed, maybe I'm not enough. Back to the moment when you almost convinced yourself, I must have done something wrong. But you realize it wasn't a mistake. It was his choice. It was the choice of someone who never wanted to see what you truly carried. It was the choice of someone who didn't have the courage to handle your intensity. It was the choice of someone who preferred cowardice over connection. And your reaction? It broke a pattern. But before breaking, it hurt. It hurt in your body. It hurt in your breath. It hurt in your stomach, as if every fiber rejected abandonment. It hurt in your skin, as if you were made of exposed wounds. You realized it wasn't just him. It was an entire lifetime. It was the sum of all the times you were avoided. It was the sum of all the times you were forgotten. It was the sum of all the times you begged to be seen. And when you look within, you see. You see that you carried ghosts that never rested. You see that abandonment doesn't happen just once. It repeats itself in different faces, in different voices, in different places. It repeats itself because the wound remains open. But on that day, something broke. Not just inside you, it broke outside too. Your reaction changed everything because it didn't fit the expected script. You didn't beg. You didn't run. You didn't try to stitch together what had been torn. You took a deep breath, and you stood tall. This invisible decision was the key, and you realized that the key had always been there. You realized you could have used it before, but you weren't ready. You didn't have the strength. You didn't have the awareness. You hadn't realized it yet. And when you did, the game changed. It didn't change without pain. It didn't change without tears. It didn't change without unbearable nights, but it changed. When was the first time you experienced something like this? Your reaction changed everything, because it was the opposite of what pain always taught you. Pain always taught you to crawl. Pain always taught you to beg for attention. Pain always taught you to believe that the problem was you. But this time, it wasn't. This time, you realized that you didn't need to prove anything. You realized that you didn't need to fight to be seen. You realized that rejection was not a reflection of your essence, and this realization was liberation. But even in liberation, there were remnants. Remnants of memories, remnants of voices, remnants of glances that still burned. You still feel it. You feel it when someone takes a long time to respond. You feel it when someone pulls away without explanation. You feel it when someone disappears without saying goodbye. And each time you feel it, the wound tries to open again. But you realize that your reaction was not fleeting. It was a seed, and that seed is growing within you, even if slowly, even if between tears, even if amid relapses. You realize that now there is choice. Before there wasn't. Before you were dragged by pain without noticing. Before you became a hostage of every absence. Before you destroyed yourself trying to understand reasons. Now, not anymore. Now you realize. And upon realizing, you choose. He avoided you on purpose. But your reaction showed something he didn't expect. It showed that you weren't the fragile victim he imagined. It showed that you weren't the abandoned child he always saw. It showed that you could bleed without losing yourself. It showed that you could cry without fading away. And deep down, this reaction didn't just change you. It changed him too. It changed his perception. It changed his narrative. Because when someone expects to see you broken and finds you standing, something within that person also breaks. Something inside them questions itself. Something within them realizes that pain no longer controls you. And in that moment, you recognized a harsh truth. It's not about being loved. It's about being whole. It's not about being chosen. It's about choosing yourself. It's not about avoiding pain. It's about going through pain without losing yourself. If this video moved you, write a word that defines you right now. You realize that pain can be a master, but only when you decide not to be a slave. You realize that absence can be a teacher, but only when you decide not to let it define you. You realize that every rejection can be fuel, but only when you decide not to stop midway. And now, as you relive this wound, you feel it again. You feel the same agony. You feel the same emptiness. You feel the same knife piercing without mercy. But along with that, you feel something different. You feel the strength that was born in the midst of darkness. You feel the power that emerged when you stood tall. You feel the freedom that came the moment you realized you didn't need approval to exist. And this realization, it can't be contained in words. It can't be explained. It only fits in the deep silence you carry now. A silence that isn't empty. A silence that is peace. A silence that is an answer. Drop a heart if you're on this journey with me. You realize that you had reached your limit. There was no more room to hide. No more excuses that could silence the scream within you. You realized that the wound wasn't just his. It wasn't just from that moment. It was old. It was ancestral. It was a thread woven into your story from the very beginning. And in that moment, the ground opened up. You fell into your own darkness, with no support, with no voice, with no way out. The pain ripped from the inside out, as if every forgotten memory had decided to return all at once. Every look of disdain, every unspoken word, every chosen absence, everything came back, everything exploded, everything burned within you. And you realized that there was no longer any escape, no longer any way to pretend everything was okay, no longer any way to smile and fool the mirror. You were bare before the pain, bare before your own story, bare before all that you tried to bury. You felt abandonment like fire. You felt rejection like a knife. You felt loneliness like a cave. And for the first time, you didn't try to protect yourself. You didn't build walls. You didn't wear masks. You simply stood there, broken, fired, exposed. And it was in that moment that something began to be born. Because when you hit rock bottom, you realize that there is nothing left to lose. You realize that no one can take away what has already been ripped from you. You realize that the only thing left is you, and you alone are more than enough. You realize that you don't need anyone to validate your existence. You realize that absence is not a sentence, it's space. You realize that pain is not an enemy, it's a revealer. And this revelation burned like light in the darkness, a small light at first, fragile, almost invisible, but real. And with each breath, it grew. You realized you no longer needed to chase after those who avoid you. You realized you no longer needed to beg for presence. You realized you no longer needed to humiliate yourself to be accepted, because your reaction had already changed everything. And now what was changing was you whole, you free, you alive. And what was once poison became antidote. What was once a burden became wings. What was once silence became voice. The voice you tried to silence for years. The voice that was always suffocated by rejection. The voice that waited hidden for the moment you would finally recognize it. And you realized, and upon realizing, you shouted, a scream that no one heard outside, but that shook the entire universe within you. A scream that broke invisible chains. A scream that opened paths that had been buried. A scream that called back everything they tried to take away. You realized that abandonment was not the end. It was the beginning. You realized that rejection was not destruction. It was reconstruction. You realized that absence was not emptiness. It was an invitation. And suddenly, everything made sense. The tears that fell without control. The nights when you couldn't bear the silence. The times when you believed you no longer had strength. Everything was preparation. Everything was birth. Everything was part of a process that you can only now begin to see. And at this point you understand. He avoided you on purpose. But your reaction didn't just change that moment. It changed your life, it changed your story, it changed your identity. Because you realized who you always were. Even when they tried to erase you, you are not what they avoided. You are not what they rejected. You are not what they left behind. You are what remained. You are what endured. You are what stood tall in the midst of the storm. And this realization is the climax. It's the point of no return. It's the turning point that cannot be undone. Because now you know. And once you know, you can't go back. You realized you can go through the pain and come out alive. You realized you can be avoided and still exist. You realized you can be rejected and still be whole, and that is the victory that no one can take away. If this resonates with you, comment, "I needed to hear this." South, you realized you don't have to carry the weight of guilt anymore. You don't have to carry the shame of not being chosen. You don't have to carry the lie that you're not enough. Now you carry only the truth that your reaction has already changed everything, and it will keep changing how you see yourself, changing how you relate to others, changing how you exist in the world. And the most profound part is that you realize the wound hasn't disappeared. It's still there, but now it doesn't destroy you. Now it's a mark of victory, a mark of survival, a mark of strength. You realize that each time someone tries to avoid you, you no longer fall into the pit. You don't bleed the same way. You don't crumble like before. You realize something has transformed, and it will never be the same again. And this is the secret that few understand. The pain wasn't a punishment. The pain was a path. The pain was the portal that led you inward. And now, there's no going back. You realized, and upon realizing, you were reborn. If this tore through you, if some line here brought back everything you tried to bury, then don't keep it just to yourself. Subscribe now, because the next video will dive even deeper than this one. Comment with the wound that still hurts. Share it honestly without holding back. And share this with someone who needs to wake up from the same lie. This isn't just a video, it's a mirror. And too many people need to see themselves.